Hi folks, welcome to the Friendship Center. My name's Eric and I'm the Education Coordinator here. This is the first in a series of videos intended to educate about domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and other concerns for victims and survivors of crime. The Friendship Center is a nonprofit, community-based advocacy organization that provides services to victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and friends and family members of those victims who have been impacted as well. All of our services are completely free and confidential, and we serve Lewis and Clark, Broadwater, and Jefferson counties here in Western Montana. If you'd like to learn more about us, please go check out our website. We can be found at www.thefriendshipcenter.org. Today, I'd like to talk about stalking and the reality of stalking versus how it's often portrayed in media, such as movies and TV shows. The truth is that stalking looks very differently in real life than it does in the media that we consume. So let's start off by defining what stalking actually is. Stalking is a crime in all 50 states in the US, and so therefore the definition varies slightly from state to state. Generally speaking, stalking is thought of as a pattern of behavior that's directed towards a specific person, and that pattern of behavior would cause any reasonable person to feel fear or emotional distress. There's a couple of key aspects in that definition that we need to talk through. So first, let's talk about what does pattern of behavior mean. Again, this can vary from state to state, but generally speaking, a pattern of behavior means 2 or more incidents. Next, let's discuss how important it is to understand what it means to talk about a reasonable person in the context of stalking. It's important for us to recognize that everybody feels fear differently. I'm afraid of different things than you are maybe, and vice versa. We need to understand the context of the relationship between a stalker and a stalking victim, and we need to try to figure out if there's any history of abuse between those two people. Once we know a little bit more about the context of the relationship and whether there's been any previous violence or emotional harm caused, then we can start to understand if it's reasonable for that stalking victim to feel fear based on the behaviors of the alleged stalker. Essentially, what we're asking ourselves is, if we know everything there is to know about the relationship between the stalker and the stalking victim, do we feel like a reasonable person in the position of the stalking victim would feel fear or would be suffering from emotional distress? We'll talk a little bit more about context when it comes to stalking situations after we make sure that we're just all on the same page with what behaviors actually can be considered stalking. Most of us are probably familiar with the behaviors that we might call stalking behaviors. These can be things like watching someone or spying on them, following someone either in person or using technology to track their location. This might be any type of unwanted contact, such as in-person contact between the stalker and the victim, or by phone or using electronic means. This also might be showing up places where the victim is, uninvited, or potentially the stalker waits for someone to leave their home or their place of work or school. A pattern of stalking behavior might also include such things as approaching the family members or friends of the stalking victim, either to harass and cause fear, or for the purpose of gaining information about the victim. Another stalking behavior closely related is the gathering of information about the victim using things like social media. Finally, it's important to remember that sometimes stalking behaviors don't necessarily look like crimes and might include such things as romantic gestures like sending flowers or other gifts or potentially a love letter. The thing that's important to understand about those romantic gestures is that they often don't fit the context of the relationship. While it's easy for us to understand the tactics and individual behaviors that a stalker might use to cause their victim to feel fear or distress, it's almost more important to understand the context of the relationship between stalker and stalking victim. This really helps us to truly understand why stalking victims can feel so much fear and anxiety around the situation that they're in. As the education coordinator here at the Friendship Center, it's my job to spend time with community members, educating about domestic violence and sexual assault and stalking. And I spend a lot of time with many different groups of people. I spend time with high school students and college students, working professionals and volunteers, business people, first responders, parents, members of faith communities, and many others. Generally, I like to ask any particular group of people what it is that comes to mind when I introduce the topic of stalking. Usually, groups of people will provide the same general idea of what a stalker looks like in their mind, and that tends to be someone who's hiding either behind bushes or maybe in an alley or in the shadows. That stalker that folks picture often tends to be disguised in some way, either wearing dark clothing or a trench coat or a hooded sweatshirt. The stalker tends to be watching or following someone from a distance. And generally speaking, folks tend to see stalkers in their mind as some unknown, shadowy figure, and there's no awareness around the fact that this person might have designs to cause a victim harm. I've come to believe that we all share this same general idea of what a stalker actually looks like or acts like because of the way that stalking is portrayed in movies and in TV shows. It makes sense to me that media would show us stalking in this way because it's sensational. It makes us want to watch to see what's going to happen. And it's also an easy way for those creators of that media to help us distinguish who the good person is and who the bad person is. It would be much more difficult for us as viewers to understand who the criminal, the dangerous person in that setting would be if they were just an average person that looks like us, acts like us, and lives in our communities. It's much simpler if they're portrayed as shadowy, scary, deranged, or depraved. The reality is that most stalkers know their victims, and most victims know, to some extent at least, that they're being stalked. Most stalking victims won't use the word stalking because of our collective misunderstanding about what stalking actually is and why it happens. Stalkers are often acquaintances of the stalking victim, and very frequently are current or former intimate partners or dating partners of that victim. This is why we need to focus so much on the context of the relationship between the stalker and the stalking victim in order to truly start to understand why stalking victims feel so much fear and distress around their situation. It's important to recognize that people who know us have far more ability to cause us to feel fear. Casual acquaintances, family members and friends, and especially intimate partners tend to know far more about us than any stranger could or would. These folks that we know also know things about us, such as where we spend our time, who we spend our time with, potentially our mode of transportation and where we live, and we're often connected to these folks on social media. Many of these folks also have our phone numbers and can then call or text us, meaning that they have access to us. And people who have access to us can cause us harm if they so choose. According to the Stalking Prevention and Awareness Resource Center, only about 20% of stalking victims are stalked by total strangers. Another reality not often portrayed in media is the understanding that most stalking victims have of the fact that something is going on that they don't like. Again, most stalking victims won't use the word stalking because that word is so casually tossed around. But most stalking victims will recognize that there is something going on that feels weird or creepy or annoying, or maybe something they simply just would wish would go away. Most stalking victims do not recognize the dangerousness of their situation, because the truth is, stalking isn't often something that just goes away. Many stalking cases last multiple years, and as a matter of fact, many stalking victims feel so distressed by their experience that they end up uprooting their entire lives and moving to a new place to try to find safety. As advocates, we know that stalking is a huge risk indicator for the victim. That means that when we hear about stalking, we recognize that the person who is being stalked is at increased risk for severe harm or even death at the hands of the person who's stalking them. Especially when the stalker is the current or former intimate partner of the stalking victim, the risk for homicide increases substantially. When discussing female victims of intimate partner homicide, we know that 76% of victims were stalked before they were murdered. As you may know, domestic violence and sexual assault are entirely about power and control. These crimes are committed by perpetrators who desire to feel powerful, and therefore they do things such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or financial abuse in order to take power away from victims. Stalking is a powerful tool in the arsenal of abusers. Tactics used by stalkers are designed to cause victims to feel fear. And when a stalker causes that victim to feel fear, the stalker feels powerful. In addition to addressing other forms of abuse, the Friendship Center spends significant amount of time and energy educating the public about stalking so that we all can share an understanding of how serious and dangerous stalking actually is. As a violence prevention educator, I'd be failing my community if I didn't take any opportunity to educate and build awareness around the issue of stalking. My hope is that if you or someone you care about is experiencing stalking, you'll take it seriously and consider how you may be able to find safety. Remember, stalking isn't romantic, and it isn't a faraway thing that can't impact any of us. Stalking is a crime, and it causes harm to stalking victims. If you or someone you know is experiencing stalking, please consider contacting us at the Friendship Center. Our trained professional advocates can offer you help and resources. We can be reached 24/7 at 406-442-6800. You can also connect with us through our website. I hope this has been educational. Please take care of yourselves and look out for those around you.